morning. So we are here at Unity of Springfield. It is Sunday, November 27th. Woo-hoo, can you believe it? We've almost made it to the end of another year. This is our New Thought and World Religion Adult Ed Education class on Sunday mornings. And this morning we are going to be discussing the book Zero Limits. That's it right there, by Joe Vitale and Dr. Hugh Lynn. That feels a little loud. We will, sorry, technical difficulties.
Yeah, it's not really.
It's like, not really too loud.
Okay,
it's great online though.
It feels very canny in my ears, so we'll just go with it then. Okay. I'll get used to it. Okay. So we will start this morning with a moment of prayer, and we will say in this book, there's a lot of discussion about the Hawaiian teaching of Ho'oponopono, and so we'll start our day with saying those phrases. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. Okay, so we'll get started. So this was an interesting book. It's one of those, it's deceptively simple. So as I started reading, I thought, oh, this is going to be a quick read. It's not too cumbersome. There's not, too much jargon that I'm getting bogged down in. And initially thinking, oh, okay, this is stuff that I've heard before. This is nothing terribly new. And then I would read a little bit and I would go away, and what I would find is that my thoughts in moments of quiet would go back to things that I had read, and I was really processing and mulling over what I was going through. And so as that continued through the book, I thought, this is deceptively simple. Like, you read it and you think, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then my brain was having to really put everything in perspective and really process through it later on. So it's also an interesting book because, so what happened is Joe Vitale heard about this Dr. Hugh Lynn who was practicing in Hawaii, and he heard through a friend that there was this psychologist who had worked at a hospital in Hawaii for what they were terming as the criminally insane. So people who had been deemed to be unwell to the point that they could not stand trial for their charges, but they had committed some heinous crimes. And so he was the psychologist at this facility. And so what Joe heard from one of his friends is have you heard about this weird psychologist in Hawaii? They're saying that he healed an entire hospital full of criminally insane people, but he never had one-on-one appointment with any of them. And so this really intrigued Joe, and he started digging in and trying to find out more about this individual. And then he eventually got in contact with Dr. Hugh Lynn and was able to, not only, he went to a seminar that Dr. Hugh Lynn had done, and then they ended up I would say, forming some type of friendship, or they had some kind of connection, and Dr. Hugh Lynn was sharing things that he had learned with Joe, and they ended up doing some seminars together. And so this book is considered to be authored by both of them, but really Dr. Hugh Lynn's part is just allowing Joe to print the conversations that they had and things that they did. So that's kind of an interesting take. Also reading about, as he's describing Dr. Hugh Lynn, and he even talks about in the beginning, some of the things that Dr. Lynn would say. Joe, he's like, I'm a pretty open-minded guy. I've heard a lot of things, but this was even a little woo-woo for me, or I couldn't quite, I didn't know how to think about it, or this was really confusing. And so Dr. Lynn was just a very unique individual, and there's some of the things, the same thing. It's kind of like the first time I experienced talking about Abraham and that whole concept of, that someone could be receiving wisdom from the divine as a conduit kind of to the world. And that, anyway, this is just a different way. So just letting you know that is in here. But he seemed like he was someone that I think a lot of people would probably have described him as like quirky, but he had so much wisdom that people were willing to go with it with him. They might have a moment of like, oh, okay, I don't really know about that, but then the next thing he would say, or whatever he would describe was so right on, they couldn't really help but feel a connection with him. And that's exactly how Joe describes his experience in here as well. And so what Dr. Lynn ended up telling him is that, so as the psychologist at this institution, he was not seeing people and doing individual therapy. He was not doing assessments. He was not doing all of the things that you might imagine as the role of a typical psychologist in a place like this. But what he was doing every day while he was there was practicing Ho'oponopono with everyone in the institution. And over the 3 years that he was there, massive changes occurred within the population. When he first came, things like restraints and seclusion were a daily occurrence. And by the end of his 3 years there, they had completely eliminated that practice. And that's not only from his point of view, but Joe ended up having interviews with some of the staff who also worked there while he was in residence. And they talked about the just complete energy shift that happened in their workplace during that time that Dr. Lynn was there. So really cool thing. So today in Dr. Lynn's vein, when he and Joe started doing seminars together and Joe wanted to overly plan them out, Dr. Lynn would say, let's just don't plan it too much. We just need to go in and whatever's to come will come. And so I did, obviously with my blue sticky notes, I've got a basic, in case everybody's super quiet or in case no one showed up, I had a place to go. But I want to start he outlines some of the basic principles. So he kind of marries this idea of the Ho'oponopono with his zero limits idea. And so the zero is what we might more commonly refer to as being completely centered or completely connected to divine. So zero is kind of where you've zeroed out all of the I don't want to say negative, but
resistance.
Yes, resistance. Thank you, John. You've zeroed out all of the resistance, and you're just sitting in that place of pure divine connection. That would be at zero. And so the title of the book, Zero Limits, of course, if you're sitting in that place, then there are no limits if you are fully connected to the divine, because we know that the divine has no limitations, right? That all things are possible through our divine nature. And so that's the idea of being at zero limits. So the first basic principle is you don't have a clue what is going on. So it says it is impossible to be aware of everything happening in and around you, consciously or unconsciously. Your body and mind are regulating themselves right now without you even being aware of it. And numerous invisible signals are in the air, from radio waves to thought forms, which you have no conscious sense of at all. You are indeed co-creating your own reality, but it is happening unconsciously without your conscious knowledge or control. This is why you can think positive thoughts and still be broke. Your conscious mind isn't the creator. that was one of those things I had to think about for a long time, right? Because that kind of, I don't know, that it maybe contradicts, or I don't know, like some of that, because when we think of being a co-creator, I don't know that I always put that I'm a co-creator in my unconscious. I was trying to, be a co-creator in the conscious arena, and I think, and so that's what he's saying is like when we're trying to do that, we're trying too hard, right? We're resisting the divine flow, and we're in our own way of thinking that we know what's going on and we know what's best for us in that moment. Dr. Lynn talks about this idea that there's so much going on, that our human brains can only process a certain amount of information at a time. And so he said it's like we're processing 15 bits of information in a moment, and there's 15,000 swirling around us that we're not even aware of. And so that's how he kind of put it into perspective. Does anyone else have thoughts about that statement? Wendy?
Well, I don't know if that's on or not.
No.
Yes. Well, it's on in here.
No, now it is?
The light's on anyway.
The light's on anyway.
There we go.
Oh, okay. Just back to the consciousness creating, okay? The way that I would look at that makes sense to me is we talk, it's like saying affirmation, and we're just using our words, but we're not using our intentions and our focus and our belief system. It's like we have much more than just our words as part of our, what I call our vibrational stance, which is the stance through which we create or attract our life to us. So when he's talking about that, I absolutely believe our consciousness, that we direct that, we can, most of the time we do it by default, but that we can, and we have that power. But it's much more than that. But it's not like there's us and there's something out there that's doing it, because we don't know. For me, there's not something out there. I know, just maybe not from the role I'm playing as Wendy Fredrickson right now.
Yes.
And I can tap into what I know in all those other areas if I have a way of understanding that.
Very good. And that's, so one of the things, a quote from Dr. Hewlin on this is, he says, what we humans are unaware of in our moment-to-moment existence is a constant, incessant resistance to life. This resistance keeps us in a constant, incessant state of displacement from our self-identity, and that's capital I, and from freedom, inspiration, and above all else, the divine creator itself. Simply put, we are displaced people wandering aimlessly in the desert of our minds, and we're unable to heed the precept of Jesus Christ, resist not. We are not aware of another precept, peace begins with me. And so I think that's exactly right. It's a displacement, a disconnect between the unconscious and the conscious. That resistance that's
just one more thing. When it was talking about the things that we don't know. So Don just got some hearing aids. And one of the things the lady said was, people will get their hearing aids and then they start hearing things they didn't hear before. And he'll go, I can hear myself breathing. It's driving me crazy. I walk and I can hear every step. And one of the things she said, people will stop wearing their hearing aids because they have to their brain has to relearn how to tune out what's not important. And we do that all the time. We tune out what's not important that's going on around us all the time that we don't pay attention to. So there's so much we miss.
Yes. All right. The second basic principle is you don't have control over everything. So obviously, if you don't know everything that is happening, you can't control it all. It's an ego trip to think you can make the world do your bidding. Since your ego can't see much of what is going on in the world right now, letting your ego decide what is best for you isn't wise. You have choice, but you don't have control. You can use your conscious mind to begin to choose what you would prefer to experience, but you have to let go of whether you manifest it or not, or how or when. Surrender is the key. So that's a common thread there that we've heard in other material that we can. So they're saying we can choose what kind of experience we would like to have, but it's that getting out of the how, right? That Sue talks about a lot. There's a couple. So one thing he talks about with problems and this whole idea of controlling. So he says the intellect working alone can't solve these problems because the intellect only manages. Managing things is no way to solve problems. You have to let them go. When you do Ho'oponopono, what happens is that the divinity takes the painful thought and neutralizes or purifies it. You're not purifying the person, place, or thing. You are neutralizing the energy you associate with that person, place, or thing. And so that is why the first stage of Ho'oponopono is the purification of the energy. It says, so now something wonderful happens. Not only does that energy get neutralized, it also gets released. So there's a brand new state. Buddhists call it the void. The final step is that you allow divinity to come in and fill the void with light.
Abraham calls that the vortex.
Yes. Yes. All right, any thoughts there? Any thoughts on that? Okay. The third is you can heal whatever comes your way. So whatever appears in your life, no matter how it got there, it's up for healing simply because it's now on your radar. The assumption here is that if you can feel it, you can heal it. If you can see it in someone else and it bothers you, then it's up for healing. Or as I'm told, Oprah once said, if you can spot it, you got it. You may have no idea why it's in your life or how it got there, but you can let it go because you're now aware of it. The more you heal what comes up, the clearer you are to manifest what you prefer, because you will be freeing stuck energy to use for other matters. So this was going into the practice of the Ho'oponopono is what this book and Joe and Dr. Lynn would say you use to do that healing process and that cleansing process. So Dr. Lynn called it cleaning. So he would say, I'll clean on that. I'll clean on that if anyone brought anything up. And so it was interesting to me. I've heard about Ho'oponopono before, and I don't know. I think I hadn't paid close enough attention maybe to fully understand the intention behind it, or I had heard it in a different, or I don't want to really say incorrect, but kind of in an incorrect way, in a different way. And so the two different types. So Dr. Lynn had learned from a woman named Morna, and she had also been known for doing lots of healing. And the thing with her, she had a prayer that she would use that was more focused on, it was less about taking that responsibility in the person, but kind of do take responsibility as a group or whatever. So I'll just read her prayer and then we'll see if any of you share some of the thoughts that I had about, so her prayer that she used that she is reported to have helped heal hundreds, if not thousands of people, is this: Divine Creator, Father, Mother, Son is one. If I, my family, relatives, and ancestors have offended you, your family, relatives, and ancestors in thoughts, words, deeds, and actions, from the beginning of our creation to the present, we ask your forgiveness. Let this cleanse, purify, release, cut all the negative memories, blocks, energies, and vibrations, and transmute these unwanted energies to pure light. And it is done. Do we have any?
Sounds like a very,
Elvie? Oh, and Dawn?
I was going to share what Mary had put on the stream. Obviously, she has a background in working in prisons, and she said, this is so true. Change the energy you surround the person with, and it all changes.
This is kind of the same thinking that has gone around in Native American circles and of cleansing the earth, asking forgiveness for all the blood spilled, and it's going back to that clearing space, going back to the zero, going back to the clear. And I know Scientology uses the term clear. Avatar uses source. Abraham uses vortex. And it's all saying the same thing, and it's all releasing and letting go and coming to that place of neutrality where the power is allowed to flow through.
Okay. Dawn, did you have something to say?
oh, yes, thank you. The power in this prayer seems to be the fact that it has an eternal perspective. It goes from goes to all through creation, and I think that's where the power lies. That we have no resistance to anything, anytime, anywhere at all. And it includes everyone and everything. How can you miss?
Okay. Man, I thought there would be I thought one person would say, like, it kind of sounds like a prayer to the outer instead of inner.
I didn't want to just add that.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was, when I first read it, I was like, oh, like that kind of feels like I'm praying to someone, some energy outside of me. But I think I see, like, after reading it through a few times, I was like, okay, I could get to a place where I would have that understanding, like you said, Dawn, like, that I'm just truly including all energies connected from the beginning of time to now. And
Without the perspective, you can't do anything.
yeah, but I had a moment where reading that, I was like, how could this work, or how could this be? Because that feels like, once again, we're looking outside. So what Dr. Lin did with his Ho'oponopono and the practice is they, like, really truly, those 4 phrases, like, bring it into you. And this is the part where I will say I had either not paid attention or I had not heard it the way that it had been presented. Because in my mind, when you were doing that Ho'oponopono and saying I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, that you were, in a sense, saying that to the energy of the person or the thing or whatever it was that you were struggling with. And what's explained in this text is that what you're actually doing, you're saying that to the divine, to your divine nature, like everything, it all begins and ends inside of us, right? The kingdom is there, and it's about our connection. And so it's not so much, you can have someone in mind, or so, like, if I'm having a struggle with Wendy and I think I need to clean on that, yeah, she's throwing her fists up at me. because she's such a fighter. If we were having difficulty with this version, or with what Dr. Lynn says with Ho'oponopono, is what I would be saying is the I'm sorry, which he actually has a story in here about someone from Unity saying, I really have a hard time saying I'm sorry and please forgive me, because I don't believe the divine needs me to apologize or to give me forgiveness. And he said, yeah, that's not really what you're doing. I understand you not wanting to say that, but here, let's explain what you're really doing. And so the I'm sorry is saying, I acknowledge that there is some piece of this that is mine to work on, or I take responsibility for my piece of this as a connected energy with all of humanity, that there is something within me that I need to heal. So I'm sorry is just that kind of, I wasn't aware, I had forgotten it, and I now acknowledge, I'm sorry. I acknowledge that there's something within me. I take responsibility for that. Saying, please forgive me, is you are asking for self-forgiveness. Please forgive me in my humanness for not recognizing that you're not asking the divine for forgiveness, you're asking yourself for forgiveness. I think there's a piece of that you could be asking the person or thing, but it's all the inner work, right? Because even if we are asking someone else for forgiveness, we don't control whether or not they actually give the forgiveness, right? But if we're asking ourselves for forgiveness, if we're trying to get to that inner that place of zero, like, we can do that within ourselves. We can't control or manipulate those around us. They might be impacted by our energy shift, but we're not in control of that, right? And so that's, if you have the issue with the I'm sorry and the please forgive me, it was so interesting, because I was having that as I was reading through. I was having that whole thing of just like, I just don't know if I could sit around saying I'm sorry, please forgive me about everything, because I was coming at it from that other place. And then, like I said, I got to the part where he was speaking at a Unity church, and they had this whole discussion about that. And then it later described how it's just the shortened version, and that's how Dr. Lynn and others have put it into perspective. But I think it changes it when you know that you're not saying that to anyone outside of you, and you're not saying that to a divine entity that's also separate from you. You are saying that within yourself, and that made a huge difference for me. Yeah, Don.
There is an element of the forgiveness business. You're not just asking for something for yourself when you ask for forgiveness. You are also serving the other person and giving them the opportunity to rid that chain that's hanging on them. In other words, you forgive me so you don't have to carry around that angst, that hatred, and that unforgiveness. So it's a mutual thing. You want to clear it in both directions. You want to rid them of what they're carrying that holds them, that has their resistance involved, because there's some hatred or animosity still hanging on them, and you're asking them to drop that for their own benefit, as well as releasing you from the implications of what's going on between you. So it's a mutual thing. Forgiveness is a mutual thing, and not just flowing in one direction.
Yes, and so that's perfect.
Dawn.
Yeah, I also kind of read a self-compassion, or practice of self-compassion or hear that in the prayer. and feel that that's an important part of the process.
Mm-hmm. So what it says here is, so in saying that you're acknowledging that something without even you knowing what it is potentially has gotten into your body or mind system. You may have no idea how it got there. You don't need to know. And so they talk a lot about memories also, of like just memories that we carry with us as humankind. And so it really goes back to, the things. It's so funny because I was reading this, and then the kids wanted to watch Frozen. The grandkids wanted to watch Frozen, both of them again the other night. And I don't know if you guys have seen the second Frozen movie, but Olaf the little snowman, he keeps saying throughout the beginning of the movie, did you know that water has memory? And then that becomes an important part of the movie later. But what he says is, before, I think one of his little spouts facts that he spouts off, is he says, did you know every drop of water before we see it now has been through the body of at least 4 humans or animals? And so he was just saying, like, it is eternal, that, we know this process of the rain falling and evaporation, it goes back. So like, he's saying water has memory, that energy has been, the water has held on to that energy. And so that's kind of what they're saying, is like, we as humans, we've held, there's energies that have passed from one generation to another, one person to another. Like, we as humankind hold memories. And so sometimes when things are coming up for us, we may not understand where they are coming from, because it may not be directly related to something in this lifetime. It may be a humankind memory that we are carrying around and not realizing. So he says, so if you're overweight, you simply caught the program that is making you that way. By saying, I'm sorry, you're telling the divine that you want forgiveness inside yourself for whatever brought it to you. You're not asking divine to forgive you. You're asking divine to help forgive yourself. And there's also, so what Dawn was saying about that interconnectedness, there was a part of this that's what they were talking about. It's like, that's the influence you have on other people when you're practicing this, is the more you come to zero, the less, because we are all connected, that you coming to zero allows others to also come closer to zero, whether they are doing the work or not sometimes, right? And so as they were talking about it, I started having this image of, that we are all in those connections, that it's like I'm sitting here and there are a million strings that go out from my energy and connect to other people in different ways and for whatever reason. And some are thicker and some are thinner and all of that. And so as we work through this process and you go to zero on that, if there's a string between two people, right, that creates that resistance. And as we're working on this, if you cut that string or dissolve that string, and there's no longer that resistance on your end, then naturally the resistance falls away on the other end as well. And they may not realize that that's what's happened, but that's the impact we can have on the world. And so that's what Dr. Lynn says, is if we're all cleaning and coming to this place of zero, well, then we are just, cutting those strings, so to say, and creating less resistance about things. And that's how he says he had an impact on the hospital that he worked in, is that he just continually was getting to zero on these issues. And as he did that, people around him relaxed and then started getting to a place where they could make different choices or make different changes, because that resistance was falling away in everyone.
Amy?
Yes.
It's like when you throw a stone into a pond and the ripples go out. Well, anytime that we go to that point, we're sending the energy ripples out, and there's no boundaries because we're all connected. And so when even one of the things that Avatar does is it creates what they call a serious drill, and you're sending energy to a person. And I can remember very clearly the moment that I shifted, because I had a couple people that were sending that energy to me, and it allowed me to shift. And the moment that I shifted, it was a suddenly moment, and it was like, oh, and all of a sudden the world is different because you're accepted the way you are, but not as you are. And your as changes. So what you're perceiving as when you're at zero is different than what you're perceiving as when you're an ego. And so that shifts everything.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Mary?
Mhm.
There's a saying that says, if you want to cure the ills of the world, your part would be to spend 30 minutes in quiet every day, forgiving everyone and everything for anything possible that would clear the air and just would answer all the ills of the world. Nothing but love. Forgiveness of everyone and everything, anywhere. That's the founder of Unity is quoted as saying that very thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what Dr. Lynn would say is that, yes, you've got to clean on all of that, right? And so, and that was the interesting thing too. There's several chapters in the book that are like letters or emails that went back and forth between, some of them were testimonial, some of them were that Joe had someone ask him a question in a conference, and he answered it one way, and he thought, oh, I wonder how Dr. Lynn would have answered that. So he would send him the question and then get Dr. Lynn's answer. And so one of the interesting things was, someone having a really hard time with this whole connectedness, and they were talking about, like countries that we're at war with, or situations that are happening, even political situations and all of that. And so the next basic principle is that you are 100% responsible for all of your experience. Yeah. And so in that, this person was saying, so I'm responsible for the politicians that I didn't vote for being in office, and I'm responsible for war across the world. And Dr. Lynn's response was, so where do you experience all of that? And they're like, what do you mean? And he goes, are you actually interacting with those people on a daily basis? Well, no, but I see it on the news. I hear it in conversations with my friends and all of this. And he said, right. So you are experiencing all of that within your own mind, within your own, within your own self is your perception of that situation, your feelings about that situation. Because if we think about it, some of those things do impact us on a daily basis, but a lot of it is just like, if we sit and listen to the news for an hour, like we didn't hear any of those conversations. We didn't interact personally with any of those people, right? We're not sitting in that situation, but we feel a connectedness as a connected being to everyone on the planet, but it's all happening within us. And so that's why Dr. Lynn would say, well, then you have to clean out, like you clean within yourself, you do the work within you, And then your connectedness to all of those things that are happening in the world is impacted by doing that inner work. Yeah.
So just 2 points. One of them was, I used to have a hard time. It wasn't that I didn't want people to, I didn't want to help people, to have it better. But I had a problem because I didn't feel like, who was I to say that they shouldn't go through this learning experience? Who was I to determine what they should have or what they shouldn't have? Because I couldn't see this big picture. But once I began to realize that at the core of us, all of us are desiring our good. When I read Emma Curtis Hopkins and everything, I could recognize that if I'm thinking of something wonderful for somebody, I can't be going against their will, because that's the true will of all of us. And the second one was, just recently I've gone through this big transformation inside, and I'll just give you the gist of the end of it, is that from the beginning, I am the one that is telling the story that I'm experiencing. And nobody can play a role in my story except the role that I give them. So if I want to change the story that I'm experiencing, I have to start telling a different story inside so that others can play different roles in my life. And there's a lot more to this than just that. But even in that, I've come to a place of, I can look at my biological father and I can just absolutely appreciate that he was willing to come and play in my story. That he got to play a monster in my story. And that somebody was willing to do that. Let me create a story and assist me in it. And now the only question is, what now? What story now?
How do you want to change it?
Clay?
These are very interesting questions, and what was brought to my mind was I was watching a segment on the NBC Sunday morning program, speaking of news, but it was actually some positive segment about Marcus Mumford, the musician, and when you were talking about forgiveness, he has written a song on his new album about forgiving the person who sexually abused him when he was a child. And I got everything that he was saying is the same thing that you're saying, that he was doing it for himself, not for, but it affected, as Elby said, he just now told his mom about it, for example. I mean, you can't really hide it from her when it's, pressed onto vinyl, but it's just so powerful. The whole idea of forgiveness is really almost against human nature, but once we accept it, and as you were saying, do it for ourselves, rather than expecting, a response that we think that we deserve, when it's really all about, as someone has said over and over, it's just such a cliche term, but it is an inside job to improve your lot. And I'm going through recovery and Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's really a strong theme. Mm-hmm. But it's really, all of recovery programs are about dealing with grief mostly, over what you think you should have had or what you truly have lost. So forgiveness is such an important facet of going through the grief process.
Absolutely.
Oh, we got one back here.
Thank you. I was wondering if you had anything to say on being on the receiving end of an apology. It's like I've sort of seen this a few times where, they're going to AA and and they got to make amends, and they go apologize. I've had this happen to myself, and I've seen it. This guy I used to work with, some monster from his past, like he's just getting off of work, and suddenly she appears, and she's been going to AA, and she apologizes, but it's like, it seems like, well, how is he supposed to take this, really? It's like, he's like on the spot, just going, and all of a sudden she's there apologizing, and it seemed, everyone was watching, and he was just sort of bewildered. How is he supposed to take it? He goes, oh, thank you, or maybe it's just like this time bomb was like, the bomb was dropped on him, and how is he supposed to react? Maybe sorry, don't cut it, lady. And and
I think
how about that 25K?
Yeah, I think we've talked about in other classes. We've talked about that apologies. The person is supposed to take it exactly how they take it in that moment, like that's personal for each one. But I think you can know that you don't owe someone the response that they want.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can say, like in that situation, I might have said, I appreciate you coming and letting me know. Or I might have said, wow, that must have been hard for you to do. I'll see you later. Like, you don't have to invite whatever that expectation of the other person is, but you can just acknowledge and move on, unless it is something that you've been needing to hear. That's why it's so personal. It depends on each situation. But I think the biggest takeaway is that when we are apologizing and when we are accepting an apology, like neither party owes the other person what that other person is expecting. You are allowed and can have the response, like whatever it is within you that is in that moment is okay and allowed. So this whole idea of being 100% responsible for all that you experience. So this line was big for me. So what happens in your life is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And so they're saying the concept of personal responsibility is beyond what you say, do, and think. It includes what others say, do, and think, and shows up in your life. If you take complete responsibility for all that appears in your life, then when someone surfaces with a problem, it's your problem too. And well, that sounds harsh, but we'll get, so this ties into principle 3, which states that you can heal whatever comes your way. In short, you can't blame anyone or anything for your current reality. All you can do is take responsibility for it, which means you accept it, own it, love it, heal it, and move on. And so that was that part of being connected. It's taking responsibility doesn't mean that you take on the responsibility of how that person's feeling, or it's not that kind of taking responsibility. It's taking responsibility as a connected person, as a connection with everyone, and going back to do that inner work to work on that connection. So that's where he's saying, like, if you are aware of it, if it's come into your existence, you're aware of it, then there is some piece, there's some part of you, something within you that is responding to that energy or has attracted that energy into your awareness. And that's why you take responsibility for it, clean it, and move it on.
I think it should be remembered that both repentance and forgiveness are divine. If that divinity is expressed in you, then it's real. If it is not, then it can't be felt. In other words, you have to be spoken to inside in order to repent of anything that you've done. And if you were asking for forgiveness, the person receiving the person giving the forgiveness has to have this divine influence in his life in order for it to be real. So they're both divine. And unless both people are participating in the divinity of themselves, it can't happen.
You know, one of the challenges in metaphysics is to be able to understand your role without blaming yourself, and without just turning your wrath on yourself about the things. But I just look at it is that once you begin to understand this, if you are experiencing blue, it's because you are blue inside. And that the only way that blue is going to change if you want red is you've got to become red inside, and then the red will show up. Rather than being mad at the blue for showing up when and I think that's all it's saying, is that being responsible is just recognizing that that's where your power is. You are able to respond to change the blue inside if you want red.
I love analogies, Wendy. Thank you. That's great. So yes, Dr. Lynn says if you have a challenge with somebody, then it's not with that person. It's the memory that's coming up or the energy that you're reacting to. That's what you have to have a challenge with. It is not the other person. And so he just very calmly, like so many times when people were kind of coming at him with big problems, and he would just very calmly say, I'll clean on that. I'll figure out, and just acknowledging that again, it's not the person. And he would talk about this with people. Well, but what about my mother-in-law? She's this, she's that, and he would continue to say, you don't actually have a problem with your mother-in-law. You have a problem with some memory or energy that is associated with whatever's going on with your mother-in-law. So just go clean on it, and see how the relationship changes. And that's really his response to pretty much any problem that came up in life. John?
I was going to follow up on what Don was saying too, that when people are on different levels of awareness and such, that if you're involved with on either side of the forgiveness piece, that if you are doing it to the divinity in them, if you're directing it, if you see the divinity in that other person and are sharing the interaction with the divinity in that person, even if they don't know it, even if they're not in touch with that, it's still occurring.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. So the fifth, I love it when our discussions get all involved. But I got two things to get through, and we'll. So your ticket to zero limits is saying the phrase "I love you." The path that gets you peace beyond all understanding, from healing to manifestation, is the simple phrase "I love you." Saying it to the divine cleans everything in you so that you can experience the miracle of this moment, which is zero limits. The idea is to love everything. Love the extra fat, the addiction, the problem child, the neighbor, the spouse, love it all. Love transmutes the stuck energy and frees it. Saying I love you is the open sesame to experience the divine. And so that's Joe's take on, so with that, if he says, even if you can't, or if you don't, won't, whatever, the I'm sorry, I forgive you, thank you, I love you. He says of all of that, the most important is the love and blessing everything and loving everything. And that's kind of, Wendy, what you were saying, like loving it for the experience of being able to love and appreciate that role that it played, or that it brought awareness to you about whatever, just infusing everything with love. I think we would say, also that thank you, I love you, what you tack on the gratitude and the love is really powerful as well. But when Joe started out, when he first started with Dr. Lynn, and when he started out, he talks about that the piece that he was comfortable with and that he could make himself practice during the day was the I love you, to be in his head as he was interacting with people or as he was going through his daily actions, to keep the idea of blessing the I love you, and really, again, you're saying I love you, you may be thinking about a person, place, thing, or circumstance, but truly you're saying I love you to the divine within you and all peoples, right? That connected. And so that's what they're saying. It transmutes the stuck energy, it frees it, because if we can get to that place of zero, of radiating as pure love, then there is no resistance. There is no, I lost the word that I was going to say. But that is that just purest connection and experience with the divine. And then number 6 is that inspiration is more important than intention. So he says intention is a toy of the mind, inspiration is a directive from the divine. At some point you'll surrender and start listening rather than begging and waiting. Intention is trying to control life based on the limited view of the ego. Inspiration is receiving a message from the divine and then acting on it. Intention works and brings results. Inspiration works and brings miracles. Which would you prefer? And this was a tough one for Joe, because he had written at the point that he met Dr. Lynn, I think he had written 2 books on the power of intention. And so he said this was a really hard pill for him to swallow. But what the understanding he came to is that intention works, setting intention works, and it's more of a coming from a place of the conscious mind, and it may be a stepping stone to getting to the place where you can hear and follow true inspiration. And so nothing is good or bad, right? It's just it is what it is. But he's just saying what he's come to learn, or what he came to learn in this process, is that setting intentions and getting results is great. Hearing and being able to follow inspiration is even better. And so, and that's the other thing that Dr. Lynn talked about, is that going through the Ho'oponopono process, that as you free and you get to that place where you're clearing out that energy, that stuck energy, you are a more receptive vessel to hear inspiration and know that it's inspiration and act on it. And then that they have a whole conversation about that's where free will comes in, because we all know, right? We can hear the inspiration and we can choose to ignore it. That's our free will. That we can, say we're not ready or whatever. We can do that in that moment. But that's what Dr. Lynn said, is that the more you're practicing and the more often you get yourself to as close as possible to that place of zero, or you're working through, then you clear space for divine inspiration to come through. And as you become more practiced with that, as you hear it, you just act on it, and you don't question it as much. And so that's another part of so many things where, Joe would ask Dr. Lynn, well, how do you know that's the right answer? How do you know that's the right thing? And he's like, I'm just, it is what's coming through, or it's what's coming up. I don't have to think about it's just the next right thing. It's just come to me that this is the next right thing, and you go with that, and then clean on whatever comes up, and then the next thought or whatever comes to you. And let's see, I think there was one really good. Let's see. Oh, there was one part about this whole inspiration versus intention. And so, like one just real life practical example, as he said, you might set the intention to get a front row parking spot when you go shopping. You leave the house, I'm going to get a front row parking spot. And he said, but what happens is the divine fills the parking lot, and you have to park at the very end. because what Divine knows is that you need the exercise to get it. And so, you know, he talks about that, like the whole setting of intentions sometimes closes you off to what you actually need, or what Divine is actually trying to tell you, and we get so locked in. And that's kind of, you know, Sue's told the story of the person that's in the flood and they're stuck on the roof, and the boat comes by and the person, oh no, God's coming to save me, and then the helicopter comes, oh no, God's coming to save me, and all that, and you know, and then he drowns and goes to heaven and says, God, I was waiting for you. And he said, I sent a boat and a helicopter, and you know, it's when we get too locked into what it's got to look like. And so that's what Joe says in this, that he came to, that sometimes with intention setting, depending on how skilled the person is or where they're at in their journey, it may be a little too focused on how it looks and how we're going to get there. Yes. So I know we kind of went through the last of that. I will say this. So the thank you and I love you. When you say thank you, you're expressing gratitude. You're showing your faith that the issue will be resolved for the highest good of all concerned. And the I love you transmutes the energy from stuck to flowing. It reconnects you to the divine. And the zero state is one of pure love, where there are zero limits. And you are beginning to get to that state by expressing that love into the world. What happens next is up to the divine. You may be inspired to take action of some sort. Whatever it is, just do it. If you aren't sure about the action, use the same healing method on your confusion, and when you are clear, you will know what to do. So that is, and he calls his Ho'oponopono process the self-identity with a capital I. There's lots of information about this online. There's like I said, Dr. Lynn and Joe Vitale did several seminars together and continued their work, which I plan on doing some reading of. But that is our presentation for today. Sorry, I feel like we got a rush there at the end. Thank you guys for being so interactive. That was, that's exactly what I cleaned on, was releasing that, you know, that there would only be one person here when I got here today, and there would be no conversation. So amazing that you showed up, and thank you for the conversation. I hope everyone online has enjoyed that conversation today. Announcements: there will be no New Thought World Religion class on December 4th. Instead, please plan on attending our YOU Pancake Breakfast fundraiser. They're going to start serving breakfast at 9 a.m. That's always fun. Today is the hanging of the greens, so please plan to stay after service if you can, decorate for the holiday season. We got to get all the garland up and the tree. Lunch will be provided for those who stay. There will also be a Club Q vigil today at 4:30 at the church in honor of the lives lost at the Club Q in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And then save the date, December 23rd at 7 o'clock is our candlelight service, which is magical and beautiful and wonderful, and you should be there. So thank you for joining us.